You are standing over the ball, hips locked tight, and you feel it again, that catch in your lower back, that stiffness that steals 10 yards off every drive. You have blamed your shoulders. You have blamed your grip. You have spent money on lessons that never touched the real problem. But the real problem was never your swing. It was your hips. And the fix was worked out in Japan more than 300 years ago by men who never held a golf club in their lives. Here is what I learned, and I could hardly believe it when I first heard it. 5 small hip drills done in your living room can restore the rotation you thought was gone forever, the kind of loose, powerful turn you had in your 30s. This knowledge did not come from a golf academy. It came from an old Japanese way of moving the body around a center point they call the Koshi, the hips, the true engine of everything. And there is one drill in particular, described in a training manual from the town of Kanazawa in 1712, that I have never once seen taught on a golf channel. I will give it to you before the end, and it takes about 90 seconds a day. I remember the exact moment this started for me. I was sitting on a low cushion in a small house outside Kyoto, watching a man in his 80s lower himself to the floor and rise again without using his hands, smooth as water, and I realized my own hips could no longer do what his could at twice my age. So stay with me, because everything I am about to tell you, you can do at home this week, with nothing but the floor you already own and a chair you already sit in. Let me start with the thing that made me feel like a fool. For most of my life, I believed that flexibility was something you either had or you lost. I thought that once a man crossed 60, stiff hips were simply the price of living, like gray hair or reading glasses. Every golf tip I ever got was about the arms, the wrists, the shoulder turn. Nobody, not one instructor in 30 years ever told me to look below my belt. Then I spent time among older Japanese men and women who moved in a way that did not match their age. I watched a woman who had passed 80 kneel, twist, reach behind her, and stand over and over while she worked in her garden. Her hips rotated freely in every direction. And it dawned on me that she had been training those hips her entire life without ever calling it training. She just moved that way. She sat that way. She lived that way. The Japanese have a word for this center of movement. They call it the Koshi. It does not translate cleanly into English, which is part of why we lost the idea. It means the hips, the lower back, the pelvis, but more than that, it means the source of power, the place where balance and strength are born. In old Japan, a person with a strong Koshi was considered grounded, capable, alive. A person with a weak Koshi was considered finished. And here is the part that struck me hardest. In traditional Japanese movement, in the way they carried loads, drew a bow, cut with a blade, even the way they danced, the power never came from the arms. It came from the rotation of the hips around a still center. The arms only delivered what the hips created. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that is exactly, precisely what every great golf swing is. The power comes from the ground, up through the hips, and the arms are just the last link in the chain. We spend thousands of dollars trying to learn with a club what these people learned simply by living. But knowing this did not fix me. Knowing it only made me angry that no one had told me sooner. Because the next question was the one that mattered. If their whole culture built strong hips by accident, what were the specific movements that did it? And that is where the trail got strange. The first thing I had to understand was why my hips got stiff in the first place, and the answer had nothing to do with age. Here is a fact that stopped me cold. Researchers who study joint mobility have found that the hip does not stiffen mainly because it grows old. It stiffens because it stops moving through its full range. The joint is a ball inside a socket, wrapped in tissue that stays supple only when it is regularly asked to rotate, to open, to close. Stop asking, and within months the tissue shortens and thickens. The body is ruthlessly efficient. It throws away what you do not use. Now think about how you and I have spent the last 40 years. We sit in chairs. We sit in cars. We sit at desks. Our hips spend almost the entire day locked at the same 90-degree angle, pointing straight forward, never twisting, never opening. We have trained our hips very effectively to do one single thing, to stay bent and still. And the Japanese, for most of their history, did the exact opposite. This is the piece almost nobody connects. Before Western chairs arrived in Japan in the late 1800s, people did not sit up on furniture. They sat on the floor. They knelt in the position called seiza. They squatted low to cook, to eat, to work, to rest. They rose from the floor and returned to it dozens of times a day. Think about what that means for the hip joint. To sit down on the floor and stand back up, the hip must fully bend, fully open, and rotate. Do that 30 or 40 times a day, every day, for 70 years, and you have given your hips more full-range movement than most Westerners get in a lifetime. They were not exercising, they were just living inside a design that kept the Koshi alive. There is real science behind this now. A study published out of Japan looked at the ability of older adults to lower themselves to the floor and rise again without support. The people who could still do this smoothly had dramatically lower rates of falls and dramatically better mobility scores. The floor, it turns out, was a lifelong hip machine, and we threw it out when we bought our first couch. I felt something like grief when I understood this, because it meant my stiff hips were not a natural part of aging at all. They were an injury, a slow injury inflicted by comfortable furniture, 1 hour of sitting at a time, for decades. My golf swing did not break down. It was worn down by the shape of my own living room. But if comfort was the poison, then the cure had to be movement, the specific movements these people did without thinking. So I went looking for them, and what I found was older than golf, older than the modern game by centuries, written down by men training for something far more serious than a Saturday round. The trail led me to the samurai, but not in the way you would expect. We picture samurai swinging swords. What we forget is that before a single sword was ever raised, these men spent years training the hips. There are old training records, densho they were called, the transmission scrolls that pass technique from master to student, and page after page of them are obsessed with the koshi, not the hands, not the blade, the hips. One idea appears again and again in these records. It is the principle that all true power is rotational, that it spirals up from a stable base through the turning of the waist. A strike that came only from the arm was considered weak, amateur, dead. A strike that came from the rotation of the hips was unstoppable because it carried the weight and torque of the entire body. Now I want you to hold that next to a golf swing in your mind. The great teachers of golf have spent a century trying to describe this same thing. They call it the kinetic chain. They call it lag. They call it separation, the hips turning first, the shoulders following, the arms last, the club last of all, a whip that snaps because each link waits for the one behind it. The samurai understood this without a single high-speed camera. They understood it in their bodies. And there was a place where this knowledge was concentrated. In the town of Kanazawa, on the western coast of Japan, there was a strong tradition of martial training preserved by the local clans. It is from that region and that era, the early 1700s, that some of the most detailed movement instructions survive. In 1712, in the kind of training manual meant to be read only by students inside a school. There are descriptions of hip opening drills so specific that when I first read them translated, my hands went cold. They were describing, almost word for word, the mobility work a modern physical therapist would give you today. These were not mystical exercises. They were plain, mechanical, repeatable movements designed to keep the hip rotating freely under load. The men who did them needed hips that could turn instantly in any direction to survive. They could not afford the stiffness you and I have accepted as normal. Here is what haunts me about that. The knowledge was never hidden by accident. It was written down carefully, preserved deliberately, and then it simply fell out of the world when the way of life that carried it disappeared. When Japan modernized, when chairs and desks and cars arrived, the daily movement that kept the Koshi alive vanished within 2 generations. The scrolls survived in archives. The living practice did not. And that means something uncomfortable. It means this knowledge is not lost because it was worthless. It is lost because nobody was making money keeping it alive. You cannot sell a floor. You cannot sell squatting down to pick up your grandchild. There is no product in learning to move the way your own body was built to move. So it slipped away quietly, and in its place came an entire industry only too happy to sell you the fix. Because let me tell you what happened to me when my hips got stiff and my drives got short. I did what you probably did. I bought things. I bought the new driver with the promise of more distance. I bought lessons where a young man filmed my swing and pointed at my shoulders. I bought a gadget that strapped to my arm. I bought orthotics, a fancy launch monitor session, a golf-specific stretching band with a glossy pamphlet. Added up over the years and it came to more than $2,000, and my back still caught every time I turned. Not one of those purchases addressed the actual joint that had stopped moving. If any of this is striking a chord, I want you to know that I have gone much deeper on all of it in my books, Kaizen Daily, Deep Ma, and the Full System, where I lay out the full progression of these principles, from the Koshi to the Tanden, in a way that builds week by week into something you can actually feel in your body and your game. You can find them linked in the description below. And here is what I want you to understand why that industry kept you away from the real answer for so long. And now I understand why. There is no reason for that industry to point you at a free solution you can do on your own carpet. The entire business model depends on the problem being complicated, expensive, and just out of your reach. Keep it mysterious, keep it costly, keep you coming back. But the truth was never complicated. The truth was written down in 1712. And it was practiced by an 80-year-old woman in a Kyoto garden who never spent a yen on it. The hip is a joint that thrives on rotation and dies from stillness. Give it the rotation back, and it comes back to life. That is the whole secret. Everything else is packaging. So let me start giving you the drills, because understanding the problem changes nothing until you move. The first one I learned is the simplest, and it is built directly on the Seiza position, the kneeling the Japanese did every day. Now, I know some of you cannot kneel fully anymore, and I am going to solve that for you in a moment. So do not click away if your knees are bad. Stay with me. Here is the movement. You come down toward a kneeling position, and instead of holding it stiffly, you let your hips sink slowly back toward your heels, then rise, then sink again. Slow, controlled. What this does is take the front of your hip, the tissue that has been shortened by all those years of sitting, and it gently, repeatedly lengthens it. 10 slow repetitions. That is it. Within a week, you will feel the front of your hips let go in a way you had forgotten was possible. The second drill is the rotation your golf swing is starving for. You sit on the floor, knees bent, feet flat in front of you, and you drop both knees to one side, then to the other, side to side, like windshield wipers. The old Japanese sitting positions move through exactly this range constantly. What you are doing is teaching the hip to rotate internally and externally, the precise motion that lets your hips clear on the downswing. 20 slow passes. Your lower back will thank you before your driver does. But here is where I have to stop and speak directly to one particular person watching this. Maybe you are thinking, this is fine for the fellow who can still get down on the floor, but my knees are shot, or my balance is not what it was, or I live in a small place and I am not going to be crawling around on the carpet. Maybe you are thinking this is Japanese and I am not, so it does not really apply to me. This next part is built for you, specifically for you. Because the beautiful thing about the Koshi principle is that it does not care where you were born or how far you can get toward the floor. It only cares that the hip rotates, and you can give your hips that rotation sitting in the same chair that helped stiffen them in the first place. Here is how. Sit forward on any sturdy chair, feet flat on the floor, about hip width apart. Sit tall. Now, keeping your feet planted, slowly rotate your whole upper body and turn your hips as if you were going to look at the wall behind your right shoulder. Let the hips move, not just the neck. Turn as far as comfortable. Feel the stretch deep in the hip and lower back. Hold for a breath and return. Then turn to the left. This is your golf backswing and your follow-through, trained in a chair with zero risk to your knees or your balance. Do 10 turns to each side. That is 90 seconds. And here is what makes it powerful. You are training the exact rotation your swing needs through the exact joint that lost it. In the exact seated position where the damage was done, you are turning the poison back into medicine. There is a second chair drill, and this one restores the opening of the hip. Sit tall and lift your right ankle up to rest on your left knee, letting the right knee fall open to the side. If you can, gently lean your chest forward over that open leg until you feel a deep stretch in the outside of your right hip. Hold it, breathe, and switch sides. This is the drill that unlocks the muscles that let your hips turn without your lower back paying the price. Most of the back pain we blame on the spine is really the hip refusing to rotate, forcing the spine to twist instead. I want you to hear the promise inside this clearly. You do not need a floor. You do not need to be young. You do not need to be flexible today. You need a chair in about 3 minutes, and you can begin restoring what 40 years of sitting quietly took away. This was never a Japanese secret in the sense of belonging only to them. It is a human birthright that they happen to keep, and the rest of us happen to lose. Now, I told you these movements come from something older than golf, and I want to close that loop before I give you the finale, because it changes how seriously you will take this. When I trace these hip principles back through the scrolls, I kept running into the same underlying idea, and it is worth naming. The old teachers believed the body had a single center, a point low in the belly just below the navel and deep inside near the top of the pelvis. They called this the tendon, sometimes the hara. Everything they taught moves around this center. All power originates here. All balance is held here. When your center is strong and your hips are free to rotate around it, you are, in their words, unmovable and unstoppable at the same time. Modern sports science stumbled onto this same point and gave it a duller name. They call it the core, or the center of mass. Physical therapists now talk about hip-spine separation and rotational power, exactly the way those old manuals did. The words are new. The truth is ancient. And here's the bitter part. We paid, collectively, billions of dollars to rediscover with machines what a training scroll spelled out plainly in 1712. Every great ball striker who ever lived, whether he knew it or not, was obeying the law of the Koshi. Power from the ground, rotation through the free hips, the arms arriving last. When your hips are stiff, that chain is broken at its most important link, and no amount of arm strength or new equipment can repair it. You are trying to crack a whip with a broken handle. So the samurai had it. The old scrolls preserved it. The way of life carried it for centuries and then let it fall. And now, right here, you are about to be handed the single most valuable piece of it, the one drill I promised you at the start. Here is the finale, and I have saved it because it is the one that changed my own swing more than anything else I've found. In those training records from the Kanazawa tradition, dated to 1712, there is a preparatory exercise the students did before all others. It was considered so basic that it was almost never spoken of outside the school, the way a master carpenter never bothers to explain how to hold a saw. It is assumed, foundational, invisible. And because it was invisible, it was one of the first things lost when the tradition faded. I have never seen it taught in any modern golf instruction, and once you feel it, you will not understand how it was ever forgotten. It is a standing hip rotation around a fixed center, and the genius is in one small detail that everyone today gets wrong. Stand with your feet a little wider than your shoulders, knees soft, not locked. Now here is the detail that makes it work. You place your hands on your hips, and you imagine a vertical rod running straight down through the crown of your head, through your center, down into the ground between your feet. That rod does not move. Your job is to rotate your hips around it while your head stays perfectly still, hovering over that fixed point. Slowly, you rotate your hips in a horizontal circle, pushing them forward, then to one side, then back, then to the other side, carving a smooth circle with your pelvis while your head and your feet stay planted and quiet. 5 circles one way, then 5 circles the other way. It sounds almost too simple, but feel what it does. It moves the hip joint through its entire range of rotation in every direction, all while training your body to keep a still center, which is the exact skill a golf swing demands. A still head, a rotating hip, power spiraling around a fixed axis. The old scroll was describing 300 years before the game came to Japan, the perfect training drill for a golf swing. The old teachers had a phrase for what this builds. They said the hips must be like a mill wheel, turning around its post. The wheel moves endlessly, but the post never moves at all. When I first stood in a quiet room and did those slow circles, keeping my head still over that imagined post, I felt hip movement I had not felt in 20 years. And the next time I swung a club, my hips cleared through the ball on their own, without me forcing them, and the ball flew. 90 seconds a day, 5 circles each direction, no equipment, no membership, no young man with a camera telling you what you already knew was wrong. Just a movement written down by people who understood the human hip better than the entire industry that has been selling you fixes for it. And that is the whole thing. One person kept it in a scroll. A whole culture lived it and then let it go. And now it is sitting in your hands, on your carpet, in your chair, waiting for you to simply do it. Here is what I want you to walk away feeling. You did not lose your swing to age. You lost it to a way of living that quietly stole the movement your hips were built for, and what was stolen can be taken back 90 seconds at a time. Starting tonight, you are the kind of person who always suspected the expensive answer was not the real answer. You suspected that somewhere behind all the gadgets and lessons there was something simpler, older, and truer that somebody forgot to tell you, not by accident, but because there was no money in telling you. You were right. You were right all along. So tell me this, and be honest. When was the last time you actually sat down on the floor and stood back up without using your hands? Think about it. Then leave me a comment and tell me whether you could still do it easily or whether it made you realize how far your hips have slipped. I read them and I answer. And if you feel what I felt, that quiet anger that this was kept from us, mixed with the relief that it is not too late, then come with me. This channel is a small gathering of people digging up the practical knowledge the modern world shelved because it could not be sold. Subscribe and stand with us, because the next thing I've found is even stranger. It is a single Japanese breathing habit tied to that same center point, the tendon that the old records claim can steady your hands under pressure, the very thing that makes us shank the short putt when it matters most. I will show you exactly where it was written and exactly how to do it, but only if you are here when I bring it back. Before you go, one thing. This video showed you the idea, but inside the Japanese way circle, I walk you through all 5 Koshi drills, movement by movement, including that Kanazawa drill I promised. If something doesn't feel right in your hips, ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel any time with one click.